was busy thinking about.
So if we're trying to build a dam here, the first thing we're going to do is build a tunnel to divert the water around the dam location. Then we're going to come in here and fill this with some temporary material to block off the water. Now the water is going to flow through here, hit here, go through the tunnel, and avoid the dam site. Now that there's little to no water, you can construct the dam. Then once the dam is done, this temporary dam is opened back up. The tunnel is then closed. And then now the water can flow through the dam and then return downstream.
I was busy thinking about.
So these cranes actually build themselves as they get higher. So when a crane needs to expand, it'll pick up a new section, and then there's a hydraulic jack here that'll plant itself on this level and then raise the entire part of the crane up so this section can be installed here. This is the best video I could find that shows the process.
I was busy thinking about.
So most of them float and are just dragged out to the ocean. They'll even drag those giant towers out from land. Only the concrete ones are constructed in the ocean. This is dragged out, these mostly float, and this only floats. So if you have your rig here, then that has a buoyant force acting on it and a center of buoyancy which tries to rise. This is counteracted by gravity which pushes down and has a center of gravity which is trying to fall. When they line up in the center, then your rig is stable. However, if the center of gravity is above the center of buoyancy and it gets knocked over by a wave, the center of gravity has a path to fall even lower, which it'll take, and the center of buoyancy will try and rise up, causing it to spin and capsize. However, if you add a weight to the bottom here, then when it's knocked by a wave, the gravity can return to its lowest position and the center of buoyancy can return to its highest position without them crossing over each other. And if they can do this, then the rig will not capsize and flip over.
I was busy thinking about.
Okay, so if we need to go from this side to that side, we build out a temporary platform here, and then we pile these sheets into the ground to form a dam. Then once we pump all the water out of the dam, it's like building on dry land. This is what it looks like in real life. Once it's done, the dam is then flooded. Then you can build off the piers, and then you've got your bridge. So if we need to build a lighthouse here, the first thing we're going to do is pre-construct these large concrete boxes called caissons. Then we float them out and sink them on top of each other until they reach the surface. Once they're at the surface, we pump the water out. Then we fill it with concrete. Now the foundation's done, and a lighthouse goes on top.
I was busy thinking about.
Another way bridges are built are by taking these prefabricated caissons and sinking them to the bottom of the water. The bottom of the caisson is filled with air where workers are digging through the soil to reach the bedrock at the bottom. When they reach the bottom, they'll then start pumping concrete down to fill up the caisson. Once it's filled, you can then construct the rest of your bridge. This is how the Brooklyn Bridge was constructed.
I was busy thinking about.
Okay. So you start them on each side of the river and then slowly build them out until they kiss. So each part of the bridge needs to be strong enough to support its own weight as it cantilevers out across the water. And sometimes to help out with that, they'll have a cable that runs from here to here to sort of brace it back from falling. For cable stay bridges, once you have the tower and foundation built, you can build out your deck, run a cable down, and then pour on your concrete, and then slowly build out until you reach the end. For suspension bridges, once you have your cables running between the towers, you can just come in and place your precast deck pieces under each one and build it out from wherever you want. Here's an arch bridge where the arch is not stiff enough, so they precast it and slowly tipped it down to meet. Then here's a suspension bridge where they just started building it in the middle and are going to connect it to the tower. And then here's the cantilever, where they just cantilever it off and slowly connect it back up as the deck gets longer.
I was busy thinking about.
So I actually built one of these in the fall last year. So to understand how this doesn't fall down, we're going to only look at the top piece. So because this leg is attached to the top of the table, the center of gravity isn't in the center, but probably somewhere right around here. To counteract gravity, the tabletop is actually being suspended from the center wire, which is in tension acting this way. Now these forces don't line up perfectly, which is going to cause the table to spin this way. Now to stop the tabletop from spinning like this, the edge wire pulls down on this end and keeps it in place. So now these are all the forces on the table, and then they all balance like this. so that this table doesn't fall down.
And snow comes from the sky, and earthquakes from the ground. Where does the wind?
So wind also comes from the air. And what it is when the air moves from high pressure regions to lower pressure regions. And these differences in pressure are caused by differences in temperature within the air. So if we're here in a hot climate, we'll have the air here sort of heating up and wanting to expand, so it'll move and rise up into the air. And up north or high in the atmosphere, you have air cooling down and sort of condensing, so it becomes heavier and wants to fall down. And basically these lines here, these arrows, are what the wind is. So the exchange of this air in this way is how wind is generated. And this isn't a perfect analogy, but I sometimes think of it like an oven, where when you open up an oven, you can feel the heat rush out. And so all the air by the equator, or where it's hot, is the oven. And then when it moves north or up in the air, that's sort of the heat rushing out. And then what you feel in the process is the wind as it passes by. Okay, so I'm not an expert in planetary gravity, but I always think of it like the skin on your hand. So your hand is the earth and the skin is the water. And so you can kind of like move around the water and like push and pull at it, but it still is connected to the earth. So the moon comes in and basically pulls on the water that's sitting on the earth and draws it towards it, but without disconnecting it. So if this is the earth and then this is the moon has a gravitational pull that pulls things towards it. So this gravity is going to latch onto the water and start pulling it towards the moon. When it does that, this water level is going to slowly move towards it, which is where you get the tides rising up the shore. This might be a better drawing, but here's the earth, here's the moon, and this is sort of like the water or the skin on the earth. And so the moon basically pulls it and makes an ellipse around the earth where you have high tides on the land over here and low tides on the land over here. So all these islands in Dubai are built by ships called dredgers, which shoot sand out from the seabed onto the land. This is what they look like in action. So the dredger will scrape the bottom of the seabed with this bucket, and the bucket will sort of suck the dirt and sand up and then shoot it out onto the land to build more land. Then as they shoot these layers of sand onto the islands, they'll lay out these sheets of this geotextile, which basically increases the stiffness of the sand by increasing the friction. That's why these islands can maintain their form so well. These outer layers here are also fortified with stone so that they can break the waves and then protect the inside islands here. And then all these islands are safe from the waves eroding them.
I was busy thinking about.
So underwater tunnels are either constructed on land and then sunk into the water. So they'll take these large components like this, bring them in one by one and connect them, and then put sand and dirt on top of it to keep it underwater. Or they're dug out by boring machines like this, which tunnel into the dirt and then create the hole while also laying concrete around it to support the tunnel. This is what it looks like, and it can also be done underwater as well.
All of the underwater tunnels I know of are in fact underground tunnels.
So Hank is right, but they are developing a new type of tunnel that just kind of sits in the water. These would be installed component by component, and there's two different ways of supporting them. If the tunnel's heavy and wants to fall in the water, then they'll have these floating pontoons, which are buoyant enough and keep it floating. Or if the tunnel's buoyant enough, they'll have these tension legs connected to concrete on the bottom that hold it down and keep it from floating to the surface. This is what the pontoon one would look like. And then here's what it would look like if it stood on legs. So yeah, almost all of them now are either 3 or 4, where they're either really shallow and buried or they dig underground. But number 2 could potentially save a lot of construction in the future.